Welcome to the afternoon slate of the WE3 Summit. My name is Dylan Lockwood. I am the senior editor at Z-Prime, and I'm here to facilitate this discussion among some panelists who are much smarter than I am when it comes to infrastructure. So I'm going to have them go down the line and introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Erin.
So I'm Erin Boyd. I'm the Chief Digital Commercial Transformation Officer with AES, which is a global Fortune 500 company. So we have a mission to essentially go renewables. We have assets all over the globe, so I sort of work to do our digital transformation.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mayte Sanchez, and I'm the Energy Director for the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. So at our organization, our mission is to create an inclusive green economy, and we do that through 3 strategies. One is unlocking innovation through our clean tech startups. The other is transforming markets through public-private partnerships, and then also demonstrating some of those clean tech acceleration policies through pilot demonstrations. And then our last one is enhancing communities. So we work directly with community members to ensure that we're actually being inclusive of everyone as we're building out this green economy. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Darren Brady. I'm the Chief Customer Officer for Smart Energy Water. It's great to have everybody here with us as well, and hopefully everybody got a chance to enjoy this morning's sessions, and looking forward to today's session.
My name is Stefan Zschiegner. I'm the Vice President of Product Management for Itron in the software and services area. Itron, probably many of you are familiar with. My story is, energy connects communities, and I think we feel like Itron has kind of been the backbone of that process with the meters and the networks for a long, long time, and many of the utilities. But what people typically don't know as much is that we have also a lot of layer of data services that come on top of that, including analytics. We are one of the leaders in DERM solutions with over 2 gigawatts under management. We also have a EV fleet planning and EV charging management solutions, so many of other things to talk about, and I'm looking forward to the panel here.
Well, I appreciate you all being here. Looking forward to this discussion. So, Erin, I'll start with you. So what are some of the critical aspects of infrastructure modernization and infrastructure data that are maybe not, thought about or front of mind when this discussion comes up?
Right. So actually, I'm going to slightly reframe your question, even though you gave it to me in advance.
Go for it.
Just to say, I think when we start to move to this new world of what the grid is going to look like and how we should be modernizing, and not just the grid, but sort of all infrastructure, it's really critical to think of it as an ecosystem. So, everything now should be two-way. We need controls. We need to be able to not only gather data, but sort of understand what's going on. So if we think about that ecosystem, we're really talking about not only the sort of hardware, what you might say, the lines, whether it's a charging station, but also the customer. And so what are all of the ways that we can gather data? And so sometimes there can be issues with privacy, and I completely respect that. But, I think as we start to sort of move to this world, really we need to be more focused on our customers. So what are we gathering from them? What can we understand about them? And really doing this in real time and making sure that we're sort of gathering it in a systematic way. So this could be everything from, how they might be charging, where they're shopping, things that you wouldn't certainly think about. How are they using the grid, but very sort of resilient, and also making sure that you have those systems in place. So again, controls, two-way, so that it's a two-way street. You're not only sort of sending data, but you're also receiving it so that you're capturing that.
Yeah, it's that ecosystem is very much the subject here. So Mayte, what is your incubator's role in that ecosystem? How are you helping accelerate the modernization of grid infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a big question, so I'm going to take it apart a little bit. But I think actually to add on to your point, apart from, as we're looking to continue to build out this new grid which we've been doing now, right, for, I would say, over 2 decades, but really starting to accelerate now, is that as we're building out, we're also starting to see the need to make sure that we're maintaining it. And that's like perhaps not the sexy side of it. But we are starting to see in California, right? We have deployed a lot of different new infrastructure, and sometimes, the maintenance aspect becomes an afterthought. So one example, for instance, that I could provide from one of our clean tech startups is Charger Help. So they've been doing a really good job of making sure that our EV charging stations are actually working and online. Because, for those that do have EVs, sometimes you get to a charging station and it's actually not working, and then to figure out where there's one that's actually reliable becomes another facet of figuring out where the station even is. And oftentimes the charging station doesn't really need much. It's just a bit of resetting, troubleshooting, et cetera. So you do want to make sure that you also have that workforce to actually support those like smaller tasks that perhaps like an electrician wouldn't necessarily want to come out and do. So I'll add the maintenance aspect to that too. And then specifically at LACI, we recently launched a new public-private partnership that's focused on modernizing the local distribution grid. And really that came out of recent events, for the past 2 to 3 years now. We've been seeing in California that we've had, potential capacity shortage risk. And that actually happened back in 2020 when we had the rotating outages. But since then, we really are starting to see like what it means and the importance of modernizing our infrastructure because of the direct tie to all of us as people, individuals, I feel like often we talk about things as they're kind of removed from us. And really with climate change, it's forcing us to communicate better about it, because we can't have our industry be separate from understanding from everyone else. So a lot of the work through this partnership is figuring out like how do we actually facilitate this transition in a way that actually protects residents, and especially those who are vulnerable. In LA, there's extreme heat going on. We know that, folks can literally die from having the extreme heat, not having any forms of cooling systems. So how can, as we're modernizing our distribution grid, how can we begin to put the infrastructure, even prioritize it in areas that we already know are vulnerable, for instance, to power outages, or vulnerable to just not being able to pay their bills or not having any AC systems. So I'll stop there before I continue to talk, because I can talk about it all day.
I was just going to add to your comment. I mean, I don't know how many EV owners there are out there, and if you have one, how far you've driven and kind of what you've had to do from a public charging perspective. But I'll echo the maintenance, because I think when you look at wanting customers to make transitions, right, and we'll talk about that probably a little more on the panel, is making sure it works, right, and providing. I mean, I think there's some, kind of wiggle room, right, early on with new adoption, new technology that people understand. But as time progresses, that aspect of keeping it up and running, making sure all the charging stations are operational, not just a couple, and the things around that. I think that's just one example, right, of things that we're going to need to be, as an industry and as partners are a part of it, that we're going to need to think about going forward. Because a lot of the emphasis to date, right, has been around getting stuff up and running. And then, obviously the next step of that is keeping it running. And so I think customers, to keep the adoption that we need for some of the things that we're talking about, that ongoing, I'll call it sustainability of the equipment and the use of it, is going to be an important aspect, just from a consumer perspective, right?
And actually, if I could say something as well, I think one of the points that you mentioned, which I think is really valuable, again, sort of going back to the two-way control, is that, like you mentioned, it might just be a simple reset, or something simple, so that when you're sort of able to understand, okay, hey, this station's out, you're also sort of able to send back and say, oh, it's it's just a reset. You don't have to send somebody out if it's not necessary, to sort of make it easier and quicker and more flexible and resilient, almost in a real-time situation.
So, Stefan, how are data analytics affecting the development of utility infrastructure writ large, and how is that affecting data management strategies?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. In fact, I would like to add on, because I think this question really relates well to add on to the answers in the discussion here. How do you really connect and create additional insights and visibility in what's actually going on? From our perspective, you need to pick up the customers and also the utilities in their journey where they are at. And I think from the journey perspective, the way we look at this is you need to connect You need to create visibility, control, and optimize. And it kind of is in a sequence. One of the biggest problems we face right now is access to the data and the visibility to even do any analytics. And I just remember this example. We had a discussion just a couple of weeks ago where we talked to one of our customers that was a distribution network planning engineer. He said, like, I have in this low income neighborhood, I need to put in a 42 megawatt fleet, but I have no idea how to plan that. So what did he mean? He does not know where the peak is. He does not know what is going on in the neighborhood in the next 10 years. He does not know what is the real-time hosting capacity of the infrastructure. So I think when we look at this, is you need to, and it starts basically, the only way to find out is to really connect the behind the meter and in front of the meter activities and to provide the visibility and to engage with this community. So really understand, where are the electric vehicles? Where are the solar stations? What is the loading? What are the behaviors? And when you have to put programs in place to connect this with visibility on what are actually the assets that are in the low voltage grid. Do I have understanding on how much loading do I have on my transformer? Right, going to the bidirectional control. Is the power flowing up or is it flowing down? Do we really know? We have probably in many cases still models from 1960s that we rely on, but they are outdated. And we collect data every day with our leading customers that are really using the meter infrastructure at the edge to create the visibility on what's going on, and the learning is amazing. There are tremendous discoveries of things that are happening real time today on the grid that are completely different than what the models say. And we need to get this visibility, access to the data, access to the understanding, and engage with the community to even do simple things, such as planning a depot.
So just to clarify, is the linchpin there more robust data collection infrastructure, or is it better analytics tools?
I think it starts with the data collection. When I talk to all the startups that we have and the innovators, they are hungry for data and access and connectivity. I think that's the biggest barrier at this point for many of these innovations, to even apply the AI to the right data, or even having a test field. How do I test my AI that it actually does what it's supposed to do? Lab testing often is not enough. So I think the access to connectivity and visibility is the first step.
And actually, if I could just add on to that as well, I think data is so key. And I think as an industry, we need to sort of say some sort of consistency, some sort of standards, because I, will work with different EV chargers, and, they'll say, oh, well, this is the data that we can send you, and it's not consistent, and we can send it to you in an Excel spreadsheet, and, oh, did you want us to download it once a month? It's, so getting things where it's consistent definitions, getting companies and working with them, helping them set up APIs so that the way that we're measuring things and capturing things are standard across, so that when we, start to then assemble everything together, it's much easier to actually just munge the data.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, I think part of this, right, is that we've seen this growth, at least on the distribution grid, of all these new assets that we've never had before, and we're now really starting to see the impact that they're having to the grid, because now we have so many that are coming online, and we've known this is going to happen, right? This is not new; it's now happening. But what we haven't done, at least in California, can't speak to other areas, is that we haven't decided what kind of grid we want to have on the distribution side, what kind of system we want to have to support and facilitate this transition. I think what we've just started to see in the industry is this acceptance of the fact that it's happening, which kind of sounds funny saying out loud. But I think, before, especially, from a utility perspective, it was a nuisance, and it still is to some extent, but it wasn't seen as something that, or DERs, distributed, so like local energy resources, and the modernization of the local grid in the way that we're, I think, all speaking to. It wasn't necessarily seen as a solution to issues. It was more of like adding stress to the grid. So now that we've had this narrative shift begin to happen, and it's accelerated by the fact that we've had all of these reliability challenges, now it's actually like, okay, what kind of policies, what kind of systems in place do we need so that, you know, the startup can do the innovation that they need? And obviously that gets really complicated because, you know, we always hear around confidentiality issues, and there should be, you know, protections, but it could be better designed. And I think that's one of the things that we're exploring through the partnership at LACI, is trying to figure out what market structures do we need to change so that this facilitation is going to be easier. It's not going to be perfect, but how can we make it easier? And then also, you know, we're looking into the development of a large virtual power plant in the greater LA region. We started to see VPPs have become really popular, more common, and we're really just starting to see like the beginning stages of what they can do and how we can really interface with them. So we want to explore that further to see what kind of like greater system designs can we have in place so that we have better coordination and we have better access to information as well.
And I'll just, you know, I think standards take time in our space, right? And I think what's hopefully is going to accelerate that in this case is going to be the movement around the electric vehicles, right? I mean, if you think about the industry, right, and we've been talking about grid automation and things of that nature and vehicle to grid at the home, but now that we have, you know, finally, right, kind of the ability to kind of see what that might look like through the adoption of electric vehicles. We know that's coming. It's coming now. It's coming at an accelerated curve. I think that's going to push us as an industry to kind of force us to figure out how we're going to address that. And that, you know, kind of that changing dynamic that we're going to start to see from a data standpoint, because the data is critical, right? And we can't be grabbing it from all different formats to be able to make decisions. We figured that out from an operating perspective and running the transmission distribution side. Now, as the world starts to change, what we see kind of at the endpoints, we're going to have to figure out what that looks like, and we're all going to have to, back to some of the comments this morning, right? It's a partnership at the end of the day, broadly across a lot of different providers, and we're going to have to learn how to work together through that so that we can be successful together, right, to come up with these areas.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this. I think, yeah, the electrification is going to change everything, right? Clearly, we're at the beginning of this, and I think that's kind of also the, you know, I like Mayte's comments around it needs to kind of, what is the design of this new grid going to look like, and who is going to actually design it? And it's not a technical problem, as you pointed out. There's many aspects of that. And I think what we're seeing right now is, as you pointed out, VPPs or DERMs and DRs, it always, you know, becomes so many islands of solutions that all not actually act on behalf of the grid, right? They all act on some other parameters that not necessarily help. So I think from our point of view, we really believe that fundamentally that we need to really solve this we need to coordinate the integration of the consumer and the grid side much tighter, and basically move the solution at the edge where it's the lowest cost to operate, and really try to see how we can decentralize this and help the utilities to orchestrate the coordination across these different islands. I think at this point we see that coming up in more and more discussion where these islands of solutions create a bigger and headache and not solving the problem.
Right, and so because a lot of this infrastructure is, you know, it's developed on the utility side. So, but Darren, as you alluded to earlier, like there's we have to try and keep the customer at the center of it. So how do you take that into consideration when planning? How do you roll out infrastructure in a way that is fair and beneficial to the customer?
Yeah, our conversation rolled nicely into that question, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'll kind of answer it in a few different ways, just to give some thoughts to folks who are kind of thinking about this. So, from my perspective and kind of centralizing the customer, what I talk about is kind of how do we start to change the thinking to putting more control in the customer's hands, right? The customer is becoming more of that focal point. I kind of think of them as a node, right, on the grid, as opposed to thinking from a generation, transmission, distribution, and oh, by the way, the commodity ends up at point A, B, or C, flipping that on its head, right? Thinking about it more from the standpoint, how do we give customers more control in that equation in a way that makes sense? And then I think, you know, what comes with that is, you know, how do we do that, right? How do we make the customers that focal point? And that's technology, right? That's what's going to make the change in terms of helping us think about ways to empower the customer, to give them the choices, give them the capabilities to be able to control how they want to manage and engage with electricity going forward. Because you think about the customer as a node, they're going to be utilizing energy, utilizing water, gas, but they're also going to be a generator as well. They might be a storage facility as well, right? When you think about it at that macro level, that's going to be important. The other part that technology plays, right, it helps put those systems together to be able to do that. But the other piece that's important to make it really work is the engagement, right? You need to think about how you're going to utilize technology to engage with that customer so that they're basically partnering with you. We used the word earlier. I can't stress enough the importance of creating partnerships with customers on a broad basis. That is going to be a key part of it, because as we're modernizing the grid, spending dollars to do that, we need customers to use it, right? And we need them to understand how they're going to be able to take advantage of it in ways that make sense for them, right? Another piece of the equation to keep them centric, and we talked about it earlier this morning, is affordability, right? I think the dollars and capital spend required, anticipated to go through this clean energy transition is significantly more than what the industry has spent, over a period of time. And the acceleration of the changes that needs to happen, both from a resource and other side, also has to happen at a much quicker pace than we've ever seen before. But at the same time, we've got to manage how the costs impact the customer. And in order to do that, that's where the partnership comes in. And I think that's where technology comes in that we talked about earlier this morning, about how do we leverage ways to engage with the customer so that they're participating in programs, right? They're participating in things that make sense for them, time of use programs, demand response business. I used to work in that world, so I'm a big proponent of that. And other things that might be available, such that we're using technology to optimize the way we're putting the capital in, to help upgrade the resources, modernize the grid, but we're not doing it in a way that starts to put undue burden on customers where they can't, be able to afford the commodity that we have today. And I think that is going to be a really important piece of making all this work. And one more point, when you look at what needs to happen to accomplish these broad net zero decarbonization goals, right? And you look at the supply and demand side of what that looks like, I think the demand side still represents 20 to 25% of that equation, depending on what math or what numbers you look at, which means in order for that to happen, we need the customer to partner with us. They need to be part of the process. To achieve that 20 to 25%, they have to be a part of it. And I think that's where the technology piece comes in to help facilitate it.
Yeah. The customer wants power to be three things: reliable, affordable, sustainable. Maybe in that order. You can argue the rankings there, but so Mayte, I'm interested in a little more specifically. How do you modernize the grid in a way that balances all those things? It helps the net zero goals that are the topic here. Like, what are you seeing in your work that are viable solutions for some of these challenges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this is like the hardest thing, honestly. Before I used to work at the California Independent System Operator, and we used to back then say, you need to have if we're going to have a zero carbon grid that's reliable and affordable. And we used to tell folks, if you don't have all three, you're going to have a problem. And we did have a problem, right, with reliability. We were doing really well on our environmental goals and then had a hurdle with the reliability, and are quickly now, starting to respond to that. And unfortunately, utilities, state, everyone, companies have done a really good job of it. And I think now the next hurdle is affordability. And we are currently exploring that, is trying to figure out, like, what can we do to decrease these costs, because they are going up. So as we are electrifying our buildings, our transportation, et cetera, how do we continue to do it in a way that the customer, the individual, isn't negatively affected in a way that they don't want to necessarily make that transition? And I think, there is opportunity now with the IRA and the funding that's coming out next year. Obviously, that's not going to solve everything, but it is such a critical year. And I'm really interested personally as part of the organization to figure out, like, what we can do to make folks the most aware of what they can tap into, right? Because those with resources, those with familiarities who can likely adopt these technologies are going to be more aware of them. So how do we ensure that the folks that are less likely to be aware of them, that they're aware of all this opportunity? Because I think the other thing is, even if we do have opportunities for individuals, especially lower to middle income, because also, we tend to, understandably so, speak around low income individuals and needing, of course, to prioritize. But then even on the middle side, the middle income side, like for an individual who even has a home, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be adopting these technologies. It's not like you have a couple of extra grand to just be throwing away. So how do we actually get them to a place where they're even aware? Because some of these opportunities sound too good to be true. Like if I wasn't as aware of everything that's coming out, I would be a little hesitant. And we have actually been seeing that in some of our demonstrations with community members, is the amount of work. There's, free systems that were being provided. The amount of work and time that it took for residents to actually take us up on those offers and take our partners up on those offers was so much more than we had expected. And part of that is because there is a lot of distrust, and there have been, companies who haven't been the best players in the side of it. But the other side of it is, who's typically coming to your house and, giving you products or giving you a solution that's going to be more affordable? So I know I didn't fully answer your question, but I think I spoke to some of those challenges. And even when there are opportunities to solve for them, some new hurdles that we have to solve for. And I think the reason that we have these types of forums is really good to figure out what we can do to maintain or try to increase, because I don't even know if we can maintain affordability. I don't even know if we can say that our prices are affordable now. So just to increase affordability too.
Thank you for that. Stefan, what are some of the key takeaways about infrastructure modernization and data solutions that you've gained from Itron's work in utility modernization in the recent past?
Yeah, so I think I'd like to. That's a big question as well, and I'd like to also piggyback a little bit on what Mayte said here. I think then, in general, as we look at this, we mentioned that earlier about all the changes going on the grid. I think at the end, it requires a systems approach to a systems problem, right? You cannot just solve one problem at a time, and that makes it really hard. I think we recognize that, just when I talk about affordability, how do you, back to the data, how do you bring data or the right information and the right engagement to the consumer that they actually want to act on it? Then we talked about it earlier. Erin mentioned it about the real-time aspect. If I open up a mobile app on my iPhone, I give it one shot for 30 seconds, and that's it. And if I don't like it, I don't use it. I'm not waiting for 15 minutes the next day to get the piece of information that I need in order to then make it a good engagement or a good customer experience. So I think we really need to move and to the technologies that enable the consumer to take the real-time action, to have an experience, to really feel that they participate. I know we're doing all we can right now with what we got, but in order to really drive the next level, we need to step it up to the next level here. That's the consumer engagement. I think from a grid and with that, it comes the the upfront, the community engagement with multiple stakeholders to get engaged, bring the data into the commissions and into the regulators to provide the rate cases that are needed to drive the funding. It's not a single institute that's like, I need to solve this technical modernization problem. And I think we know from the capacity we have in most places in North America, that for the electrification transformation, that is probably the biggest disruption, that probably for the most part till 2030, there is enough bulk capacity there. The problem is after that, but what we have the problem to solve now is the hyper-localized problem. And that is really requiring, again, how do we address that? That you basically, back to the peak capacity planning problem. Peak capacity planning is not the solution to get to 2030. You need to have higher granularity data. You need to rely on technology to solve these, and you need to bring confidence that this is all going to work into the stakeholders, that you can get the approvals and the reviews you need to find another way that still delivers reliable, affordable energy We all have sustainability goals. All the utilities have them. They're super aggressive, and they rely on switching off this coal power plant. If you have energy transformation and you don't get this distribution grid figured out, you will not be able to switch them off. And we need to really work on this in a partnership, as a system problem with all stakeholders.
So, I think all of what you guys have been saying is very true. It's very apropos, and like you were speaking to earlier, a lot of the times these solutions are, they have to be found locally for the situation that an individual utility has with its individual customer base and all that sort of thing. But I just for the sake of making people feel a little bit better about the state of things, do you just as an open question, does anyone have like a specific, like an instance, a use case, a technology or something that you've seen get a utility to the next level, or on the right path towards better infrastructure modernization for its customer base?
I've watched it over the last handful of years. I think it's still, in progress in terms of what we're trying to do. But I'll just look at the virtual power plants in the DR business, right? I was involved in that a decade ago, and it was still relatively nascent, building out in the open markets, mostly commercial, industrial, not much residential. But look how that started to change, right? And I think the example this morning that Jill talked about in terms of the heat wave that came about in early September, and the various programs that the different utilities had in place here within the state of California, and what that was able to do. Is that exactly how you want them to operate? Maybe not, right? But it was a start, right? And it shows you the capability at scale that something like that can do. And I think a combination of technology, right? Communication, notifications, alerting customers, having educated customers previously that those are the types of things to be aware of, and all the things that go along with that, and then the execution of that. Some of that might have been manual, might have been me as the consumer flipping stuff off in my household or turning stuff off so that I'm, participating, or I might have been part of one of the programs, right? Either on the commercial, industrial side. That technology works, and I think it's making, the key there is broader adoption and broader availability across all the states here in the U.S. and other parts of the world, so that is one of the options that we have as a way to manage energy, which I think helps us as we think about the grid modernization, right? We're not going to be able to build all this stuff out all at once. It's going to come over a period of time, both practically and economically. So we got to take advantage of some of the things that work in that area. And I think that's one area where you've seen success, and it's been building upon it. And now you're seeing it used more comfortably by the operators, right? Where historically they may not have been as comfortable, but now those who run the grid are more comfortable using those types of programs.
I'd like to lay on, I really liked your question, and it's kind of like in an interview, and you're like, what else have you done really well lately that you want to talk about? And I'm like, yeah, we as a technology company, we're like, let me just here put this in. I think, we at Itron, of course, also looked at this problem and started to invest in technology, a few years back, into edge computing, and put in distributed intelligence into our metering infrastructure that enables, as a technology, these real-time controls at the edge to provide the data, the insights, not only for consumer engagement and control, but also to make the grid smarter and more, provide more insights and controls at the edge. So we are excited about this technology. We are super excited that this will help and be one element of the total picture, not at all, but clearly a starting point that will help us to build and build infrastructure into the system that enables us to reach the next 10, 15 years in this direction.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, not having a specific product to sell. I think one of the things that gets me really excited is that we're also, the utility is at the core of this, right? We can't do this, of course, without the utility being a leader and a core partner to this transition. But the other thing I will say is that there's been so much disruption in the past 5 years from also not necessarily needing to go to the utility to be able to offer your product. So what we've seen is that we've seen a lot of startups who are just starting to figure out, like, how do I innovate outside of needing to go to the utility, essentially? How do I create a product that can kind of stand alone and I can minimize my interaction with the utility and just go directly to the customer? And that's really good because for a number of reasons, but it shouldn't just be that we're working through the utility or that the utility is solving for all the issues, number one, but also our expectation for how satisfied we are as customers, it's going to be at higher levels that a utility cannot provide. It's just not, it hasn't been a part of their core business model. Of course, they're evolving, but it shouldn't necessarily just be them delivering that service. So how do we begin to develop products that do make it easier just to adopt? So like what we've seen, for instance, on the charging side, one of our startups, FreeWire, an alum startup, they have a DC FC fast charging station that essentially has a storage device integrated into the charger. So rather than having to always also rely on the grid for that energy to provide that charge, they're able to tap into their storage. Now it's becoming pretty common. We're starting to see it a lot more. Now it's everywhere. But that's like a very good example of like the ways that in the past, folks weren't even considering that to be an option, which now seems very intuitive. So it's also just really great to see all the innovation just happening off the grid, essentially.
Yeah, actually, if I want to echo that point, because I think that's one of the most exciting things that I've seen is that, it used to be so utility-centric, and now you are seeing all of these sort of, for lack of a better term, third parties that are coming in and, just sort of following on that thread. What I appreciate about a lot of the third companies is they are a lot sort of more adept, and this is no disrespect to utilities. I worked for many utilities, that at sort of understanding more in real time data. So it's this, I'm going to give an example. It's not quite sort of smart infrastructure, but I just built a house and we had a Schlage smart lock put in our house, and it works terribly, but that's besides the point. But in a side conversation, I was interviewing somebody for another job who was a data scientist at Schlage, and I was like, data science at Schlage, and she said they're gathering all the feedback and understanding how people are interacting with their locks to better improve them. And what that sort of generates in my head is that you have all these companies that are doing this A/B experimenting. They're looking at their data in real time, and they're trying to sort of go in with a mindset where they say, we think we understand our customer, but we probably don't understand our customer, or our assumptions about our customer aren't spot on. And so how can we take the data that we're sort of receiving back and either do some A/B testing and understand how things change, because consumers will tell you one thing and they will do a different thing. And so how can we start to understand that and then adapt our products? And that's why then I'm excited too to then really see this more sort of flexible third-party system sort of come in.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this. I think that's a great example, actually. I think there is a realization, right, that not a single company can solve this problem. There's so much innovation that needs to get done, and you don't know in which pockets the innovation needs to come from. So the question is then, how do you build a secure, scalable system that is sufficiently, meeting the needs of the critical infrastructure that we are operating, while still enabling your innovation that is needed, and make it open enough that others can innovate it on that system to create new use cases or new value for the consumer and others to engage. And I think that's a really critical element of the solution here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of put some notes down. I kind of said we need mass adoption of everything, right? Which is kind of an extreme, I realize. But when you really think about the scope and scale of what we're trying to accomplish here, there's a lot of things that need to be put in place. Not one solution is going to solve it all on any side of the equation. And to what Stefan said, I mean, we have to keep that in mind as we're building out and leveraging new technology, that it can't just be, it's great that it gets tested out in an area and it works, but then you got to think about, how do millions of customers use it? Or how do I replace a gigawatt of load, right? Whatever the case might be, and how do I do that reliably? So I think that's the opportunity, right? I mean, it's a challenge yet an opportunity, but that mass adoption and scale and commercialization is critical, right? And I think we're earlier stage in a lot of the things that we're doing, and I think collectively as a group of entities in our space, whether you're utility, private company, partner, what have you, we're going to have to kind of figure it out together, right? There's plenty of work to do, and I think, to me, from when you think about the grid and what has to happen, it's got to be a broad global team effort, which isn't necessarily always easy, but I think that's part of our broader mission. And summits like this help facilitate that, but that's a key part of it, in my opinion.
On a very minorly related note, there are a bunch of recently unemployed software engineers from media companies that, if you need an outside perspective, just saying. Well, we've only got
Did you say media or meta companies?
Thank you for that. Well, Erin, Mayte, Darren, Stefan, thank you for being on here with us. We hope you enjoyed this session and the rest of the conference. We're going to be doing another session here about smart agriculture in just a little bit, so if you want to stick around for that, then we'd welcome you to. But there's also another session in A, so I'll leave you to that. Thank you. Join me in thanking my panel. Hope you have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.